Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to kick off this evening. It's a great honor that we were able to team up with the Jewish Museum in Prague and Society for History of Czechoslovak Jews to bring this event here today to New York. We are looking forward to hear a very interesting lecture on a very powerful story, and I have to say that these stories are more and more important to be remembered and reminded. We are living in a world where the anti-Semitism is lurking around, and it's more and more important to remember stories like that. So thank you very much for everyone, or to everyone who is behind this this evening, because it's of a great importance. Enjoy the evening, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Karel. I would like to use this opportunity of being back and tell you very briefly of what's happening at the Jewish Museum in Prague. As probably many of you know, it's the third oldest Jewish museum in the world after Vienna and New York. And next year we will already be celebrating 120 years of our existence. Thank you. And so we decided to take a few steps to show our audience that we have all this moving long history, but that we are also a museum for the 21st century. So one of the things that is new for us is the new logo. It's been designed by Klára Kvízová Graphic Studio, a very renowned studio based in Prague. They decided to use the parts of our old logo, the tablets of 10 Commandments, and join it with the letter M, and to create sort of a bridge for the future of the museum. It also should be used very easily in online, on social media, and also in outer space, because as you, again, probably many of you know, we are located in 4 different synagogues, so we need an easy and comprehensible system so that people can get around. And I'd like to show you a few photos from one of those synagogues. This one is called Klausen. It's the biggest synagogue in Prague. It's the only one that has some Baroque architectural features. And last year we took down the permanent exhibition that was there for 30 years. Then we did some basic maintenance and painting, and we started using it for different purposes, trying to figure out what we could do with the space in the future when it's really renovated. And the first thing that took place there was last year. It was Yom Kippur, held by Czech progressive community at Chaim. And it was the first service that was held there since 1942. So it was a really moving and special occasion. We work with a lot of schools, both in Prague and from around the country. And so one of the events that we organized there was also a reading marathon for middle schools. This was this fall when we took part in European Heritage Days, and the synagogue was visited by over 1,000 people for special guided tours. And normally the synagogue is closed. It's not part now of the museum tour, so we really open it for special projects. It's also possible to have social events. This was organized by one of our partner organizations, the Fund for the Victims of Holocaust. And this was a very big adventure. For the first time, the Jewish Museum participated in the Signal Festival, which is a major festival of digital art. And we hosted an installation by young Czech artist Jan Poš, called The Myth of Hyper-Reality. And the synagogue was was visited by 6,000 people in 4 nights. So it was a great success, a lot of work, but really rewarding. We had a theater performance there. And now, actually, if you travel to Prague, now the synagogue is open for 2 months, November and December, for a poster exhibition that we prepared together with the Embassy of Spain called The Golden Age of Jews in Al-Andalus. And this is already a different event. The museum decided to give annual award named after Hanna Volavkova. Hanna Volavkova was incredibly educated and nice and funny, witty person who was the director of the museum since 1944 till 1961. She was in Terezín for about 3 months, and when she returned, she immediately went to the museum, and basically it's her credit that she managed to keep all the collections together. She initiated also the memorial for the victims of Shoah at the Pinkas Synagogue. And last but not least, I would like to mention there's this article that you could get at the door, and it's about Mark Podwal, who was a wonderful American artist, a very good friend of the Jewish Museum in Prague. He passed away last fall, and this is an article that you can find in a magazine that's being published by the Jewish Museum. It's called Judaica Bohemia, and this is already, it's an academic journal, but it could be ordered online, or actually all the articles then are available for free online as well. And this is already the 60th issue of the journal. And speaking of Mark, today in Warsaw at the Jewish Museum called Polin, they just opened a major temporary exhibition called The Power of Words on Jewish Languages. And the Jewish Museum in Prague is the main partner of the exhibition. Mark's works are on exhibit there as well. The exhibition will be there for half a year, so if you travel to Warsaw or Prague, please don't forget to visit us. And that's all from me. And I would like to ask my dear friend, Rabbi Norman Pates, President Emeritus of the Society for the History of Czechoslovak Jews, to deliver his remarks. Thank you.
Dobrý večer. That's about all the Czech I can give you this evening. To business. The Czech communist regime, like all other autocratic regimes, not only suppressed truth as a matter of course, it also rejected the importance of individuals, both their autonomy of thought and behavior, insisting instead on the supremacy of the state, a primacy not to be challenged by anyone. My congregation, for example, got a Holocaust Torah in 1975. We knew the name of the town from which the Torah scroll came, but the communist officials of the State Jewish Museum in Prague insisted that they had no information about the Jewish deportees. So from 1975 until 1994, the town's name, Dvor Kralova nad Labem, was all we had. But when I spoke to Dr. Leo Pavlat, the newly appointed director of the Jewish Museum in post-communist Prague, he said, wait a minute. He stepped out of the room, and a few minutes later he came back, brandishing a few sheets of paper. He said, here's the printout. All the names of all the deportees, the dates of birth, the designations of the transports that took them to Terezin, their subsequent transport to the east, and their fate. It was all there. We honor the memories in the congregation which I have served by including their names in our congregation's Kaddish list every Shabbat and for Yizkor. But individuals were of no ideological significance to Dr. Pavlat's communist predecessors and their controllers. Our speaker's subject tonight restores the significance of individuals by showing how the decisions and actions they took saved lives, literally. In the Second World War, you know, saving Jews was a very dangerous business. Of the hundreds of millions of people under Nazi rule, few indeed actively resisted. Yad Vashem, for example, has recognized 27,921 righteous among the nations. Now, certainly, many more were involved in other forms of resistance, and the obstacles to and risks of any kind of resistance were very high. But saving Jews was perhaps the riskiest. So we need to recover the names and the deeds of the individuals, those individuals, Jews and non-Jews, who took the risks and became rescuers. We know the names of some of them: Raoul Wallenberg, Nicholas Winton, Oskar Schindler, Miep Gies. They're fairly well known. But few recognize the names of others, like Marie Schmolka and Doreen Warrener, the two women who recruited Nicholas Winton, or Gilbert and Eleanor Krauss of Philadelphia, who virtually alone undertook a mission to rescue 50 Jewish children from Vienna, or Henny Sinding, the 22-year-old woman who captained a Danish ship, the Gerda III, and transported hundreds of Danish Jews across the perilous waters of the Öresund to safety in Sweden in 1943, or, for that matter, Pastor Andrei Trocmé and his wife Magda, who sheltered and saved thousands of Jews in their town of Le Chambon in southeast France. The deeds of the murderers are better known. Our generation, drowning in lurid social media, filled with fantasies of violence and newly acceptable anti-Semitism, needs to know examples of courageous behavior in the face of oppression. These are the models, the real-life models, to be not only celebrated, but more urgently to be emulated and not to be forgotten. As the Jewish texts tell us, Kol hamakayem nefesh achat ma'alim alav ke'ilu kiyem olam malei. Whoever saves a single life, it is as if he has saved an entire world. This is the context which makes the presentation of tonight's speaker so relevant, not only as an examination of our yesterdays, but also as a guide to how we decide to act today and tomorrow. Pavla will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
So tonight's speaker is Zbynek Tarant. He's a professor at the university in Pilsen, and he deals with three topics, which is history, anti-Semitism, and the relations between Czechia and Israel. And that's all that he gave me about him, because he's a very modest person. So without further ado, the mic is yours, Zbyňku, and please stay for Q&A afterwards. Thank you so much for coming.
Just give me a couple of minutes. Good evening. Thank you very much for this welcome. I'm honored and humbled. This might be one of the most important keynotes that I have ever given in my life. So please also forgive me that I'm being a little bit nervous. And the story I'm going to tell. Full disclaimer, this is an unfinished story which still has many empty spaces. And the reason I'm so glad that I can present it here is exactly because many of you might be having personal experiences, relatives, or documents in your personal archives. Everybody of you might have some little tiny tidbit to share, and if you feel inspired by the talk, to share it, or if you find that I'm actually saying everything completely wrong because the story is completely different, please be so kind and share it, because I would like to turn this story into a book, and I do not want to spread any fake news. So let us talk today about Leo Herrmann. The story of Leo Herrmann brings us to Bohemia, more specifically to the small little town, beautiful town of Landskron, in German Landskron, which is located at the historical border between Bohemia, Moravia, and Moravian Silesia. Leo Herrmann was born in that town in March 1888. That means during the Kaiser, during Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he grew up in this German-speaking town, overwhelmingly German-speaking town. We know that he has been a very bright student of the local gymnasium, finishing every year with excellent grades. And already as a very young student, he published short articles, various ethnographic articles about his town, etc., etc. Having such good grades, he went on to Prague to study on the German section of the Charles University in Prague. He went to study law. And from the very beginning, he was attracted to the ideology, to the ideas of the Jewish national movement, also known as Zionism. Although he was more attracted to the so-called cultural Zionism, as many other German-speaking Jews at the time. While the name of Leo Herrmann might not be as familiar to many, his cousin Hugo Herrmann might be familiar because he was a famous composer and also a chief editor of the Zionist Berlin-based journal Jüdische Rundschau, Jewish Review. This is the house where Leo Herrmann was born in Landskron. The house still exists. I took this picture last year, so the house still stands, and hopefully, maybe one day we will be able to put some small memorial plaque on the house. When he went to Prague, he immediately became involved in the activities of the cultural Zionist movement in Prague. He became member of the Bar Kochba student club, which was a a student club of typically German Jewish students, again typically aligned with the cultural Zionism. And between the years of 1908 and 1909, he even became a chairman of that club. And as a chairman of that club, it was him who invited Martin Buber, the famous philosopher, to Prague to present his now famous 3 speeches on Judaism. This is just one of the many moments in which Leo Herrmann is like a Jewish Yara Zimmerman. If you know Yara Zimmerman, the famous Czech fictional character, Leo Herrmann is like Jewish Yara Zimmerman, except for the fact that he was real. He was very much real. And you will see how much of a Renaissance personality he actually was. I have said that he was aligned with the cultural Zionism, with the German-speaking, the so-called Prager Kreis, the Prague Circle. As such, he had to fight off attacks from both anti-Semitic circles, but also a competition from the political Zionists. And there is a funny story from 1908 when allegedly there was a pistol duel between Leo Herrmann and the leader of the competing Zionist club Barissia in the Šárecké údolí in Šárka Valley north of Prague. Fortunately, nobody got hurt on that fateful morning, so the story can continue. Here we see Herrmann on a collective photograph of the Bar Kochba student club. That's him. And this is here we see Leo Herrmann with Martin Buber. These are the 3 speeches on Judaism delivered by Buber. They are now the manuscript of them is now available in the Central Zionist Archive in Jerusalem. If anyone is interested. Herrmann, as I said, he was a man of many trades. So, what kind of trades actually? So he was a journalist. He was a lawyer. He was a diplomat. He was a film producer, and he was quite a talented artist actually. Here are some of the works that he wrote, some of the early works that he wrote, such as the essay "In Fight for the Hebrew Language," written in German, and as he was, since he was very active, very talented, he was very talented, skilled manager. He was going up through the ranks of the Zionist movement. He became, he contributed to many local Zionist newspapers, such as the Prague-based Selbstwehr or Jüdische Volksstimme from Brno, or the Viennese Jüdische Zeitung. And as he grew up through the ranks of the Zionist movement, he attained some important positions, which allowed him to grow even more. I have mentioned that Herrmann was also a diplomat. This will be more visible later, but one of the first diplomatic shticks that he did was his participation on the peace conference in Paris. There was the main Versailles conference, and then there were multiple subsequent conferences to implement the decisions from Versailles. And on one of these conferences, the issue of or the status of Jews in Czechoslovakia of the newly created Czechoslovakia was to be negotiated. And as a representative of the World Zionist Organization, he was there. Leo Herrmann was there to negotiate. And during this time, he became a friend, an acquaintance of both Masaryks, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and Jan Masaryk. This friendship will be very important for later. So he is, as you see, he is growing through the ranks of the Zionist movements. And at this, in 1920, he co-established the agency which was supposed to become his life assignment. That is the agency Keren Ha-Yesod. In English, we translate this as United Palestine Appeal. And this was basically a development agency whose main task was to collect fundraising and investments and transfer these assets and personnel into Palestine. That was the main purpose of this agency. At the same time, however, Herrmann was still aligned with the cultural Zionist side of things. He was critical of some of the aspects of the political Zionism, and as many of the German-speaking Jews from Bohemia, he participated in the activities of the so-called Brit Shalom, or Tahaluf as-Salam in Arabic. This was a circle of German-speaking Zionist Jewish intellectuals who, on the one hand, supported the idea of Zionism, but at the same time, because they had direct experiences from Sudetenland about how vicious ethnic conflicts can be, they already in the 1920s, they were warning their political Zionist colleagues that this is a potential conflict and that the native Arabs should be included into the nation-building projects. And his feud with the political Zionism went as far that he even offered his resignation from all the posts in 1929 in what was kind of a bitter conflict. Fortunately, he didn't do it. Fortunately, because, again, the story would have ended here. These are the offices of Keren Ha-Yesod. The agency is active until today. And these are some propaganda posters of that agency from 1920s, 1930s, here even 1940s. Some of these posters here for you as members of the Society for History of Czechoslovak Jews, these posters are interesting for you because they were created by another very important Czech Jewish personality, by Ote Wallisch. Ote Wallisch, if you have heard about him, he is the person who designed the Israeli Declaration of Independence, the design of the document, as well as the architectonic design of the hall of the room in which this declaration was read. So this is another important Jewish Czechoslovak in the history of Israel. As Secretary General of the Keren Ha-Yesod, Leo Herrmann was also responsible for promotion, or we could use the contemporary language, propaganda of that organization. And for this purpose, not only that he used posters, Leo Herrmann discovered the beauty of the film. He became fascinated by the possibilities of this then modern new medium, and in 1935 he became a production manager of the first Zionist movie with sound. And it is also the first time in which Hebrew was spoken in a movie. Again, just like Gerhard Zimmermann, you know, he was everywhere. So the movie was titled Land of Promise. It was a propaganda movie. Yes, it was a propaganda movie made to promote the activities of Keren Ha-Yesod and to invite fundraising, to invite investors, supporters, and others. The movie was created in times in which there was really no difference between documentary and propaganda. This difference was established much later. And of course, if you would have played this movie today, which you can actually do, it's very easy. You just go to YouTube and you look for Land of Promise 1935. It's available in Spielberg Archive. The quality is not exactly great, but still allows you to appreciate the movie, which, despite the fact that it was a propaganda at the time, still contains some very, very interesting, valuable historical images. Here we see another poster for the movie, again created by Otte Wallisch. The movie had its premiere here in New York, not far from here, just a couple dozen blocks away from here, directly at the Times Square, at the Astor Theater, now replaced by that ugly hotel, but it used to be a wonderful movie theater, and it was a big event. The first screening of the movie was really a big event. Here is another picture from the archive. It was a big social event, and some important personalities have shown up. For example, here, Mr. Einstein. First, Albert Einstein, as you know, he was very close to cultural Zionists. He was very sympathetic to cultural Zionism, and he even later sent a letter thanking Leo Herrmann for the success of the movie. But the real reason why Albert Einstein appeared on this first screening was this person, who was the movie's director, Judah Lehmann. And before he chose a career in the film industry, Judah Lehmann used to be a physics teacher and friend of Albert Einstein. And Einstein himself later was kind of disappointed that his beloved pupil has chosen a different path, that he left physics, betrayed physics. But still, he showed up at the screening and later commended Herrmann for what he considered a very successful movie. As I said, you can play the movie for yourself, and I highly recommend doing so. We should give a disclaimer that yes, it is a movie that speaks the language of its time, and certain images, certain sentences would not be exactly, let's say, palatable today. For example, the movie used Orientalist language to depict the so-called Old Yishuv, or also to contrast the perceived passivity of the Arab natives with the Jewish know-how and technology and progress and skills, etc., etc. At the same time, when you see this image, of course, it reminds you something. It reminds you Soviet propaganda, for example. This was a very deliberate choice on side of Leo Herrmann. Why? Because the year was 1935. Jews were already facing the pressure of the Nazi propaganda, which was depicting Jews as these backwards and lazy and not working and you know all the stereotypes. So this movie was deliberately created to counter the Nazi propaganda and to show, no, the Jews are actually very active and they actually bring skills and know-how, etc., etc. At the same time, Land of Promise is a very interesting insight into Zionist ideology until today, because it shows the presence of very specific element which is present in the Zionist ideology until today, and that is a techno-optimism. The idea that Jews are bringing know-how into Palestine and that the Jews will make the land flourish. And it might be these workers with hammers bringing water to the desert, or it might be the contemporary books like Startup Nation. It's the same trope still present in the Zionist ideology until today. The film was screened all around the world. It had dozens, if not hundreds of screenings. Only in Bohemia and Moravia proper, it had dozens of screenings. And these are some posters in the Czech language that were prepared for that movie. And yeah. And if the war didn't come, if the Munich Agreement didn't come, Leo Herrmann would have likely continued his fundraising efforts and simply made more movies, more promotion. He's simply doing, let's say, menial work. However, the history taught otherwise. Just 3 years after the screening of Land of Promise, the Munich Agreement came, and as a Secretary General of an agency whose main task was transfer of assets and people from the diaspora to Palestine, to Eretz Israel, Leo Herrmann understood the possible challenges posed by the Munich Agreement, especially since he himself was from these border areas that were later designated as Sudetenland by the Munich Agreements. Leo Herrmann understood the precarious situation of the refugees, of the Jewish refugees who suddenly lost their citizenship as a result of the Munich Agreement, since after the Munich Agreement they lost the Czechoslovak citizenship, and at the same time they were not welcome in the Nazi Germany, so they were trying to escape back into Czechoslovakia proper after Munich, but they were not accepted by Czechoslovakia. Many of them were left stranded on the no man's land, exactly as Arié Navon, the famous cartoonist from the newspaper Davar, has described it, this Jewish refugee balancing on that borderline, asking, at least here can I stay? And Leo Herrmann understood the situation even before Munich. He already started to mobilize assets of his organization to help the Jewish refugees. However, the situation was very difficult. The many gates of emigration have already closed. There were not many options available. Fortunately, there was one opportunity that he was able to use. As a result, or after the Munich Agreements, the Great Britain offered to Czechoslovakia to, let's say, sweeten the pill of Munich by giving Czechoslovakia about 10 million pounds as partially as a gift, partially as a loan. And Leo Herrmann came with the idea to dedicate a small portion of that loan, of about half a million pounds, to fund legal Jewish immigration into Palestine, into the British mandatory Palestine. The Munich Agreement was seen very, very negatively by the Zionists in Palestine. I have dedicated an entire book to it, and this is also how I found originally Leo Herrmann, through the newspaper references to something called Czechoslovak transfer. And until that time, I didn't know there was something like avara for Czechoslovakia. Until that time, I thought, well, that's a German thing, right? No. Keren Ha-Yesod was actively involved in the avara for Germany, and basically Leo Herrmann came with the idea to do something similar for Czechoslovakia. He visited the country very shortly after the demobilization of Czechoslovak soldiers from the borderlands. Shortly after the Munich Agreement itself, he wrote a very emotional report about what he saw in Czechoslovakia, and used this report to address key politicians in Czechoslovakia, in Great Britain, and to promote his idea. More specifically, he writes in his journal, and now I have here. Is it here? I had translations of the. Memoirs, but basically he wrote in his diary how he saw the situation of the Czechoslovak Jewish refugees, how they were stateless and without passports, without rights, and how he found strong support for his plan among some of the key politicians, most notably Jan Masaryk, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs. And Jan Masaryk equipped Leo Herrmann with a couple of recommendation letters that allowed Leo Herrmann to go into direct negotiations, both with the ministers of the Czechoslovak government, with the chairman of the Czech National Bank, and also with the mayor of London and other people. This is, for example, one of the letters written by Eliezer Kaplan to Josef Kotek, who was a minister of social care. So, as I said, the main idea was to dedicate portion of that Munich loan, as it was referred to, for emigration to Palestine. How it exactly worked. There were not really many ways for Jews to legally enter Palestine at the time, and the British were closing even those. However, there was one loophole. That loophole was called A1, capitalist certificate. This was basically a golden visa, which allowed people to immigrate legally into Palestine as long as they could prove that they are bringing with them a capital of £1,000. That was a significant amount of money. It was more than 100,000 crowns at the time. You could buy 6 automobiles for that money, just to realize how much money that was. So the idea was that the British will the Jewish organizations will use £500,000 from that British loan, divided between 2,500 Jewish immigrants, which means about £200 for each of these immigrants. And then additional £800 would have to be provided either by the immigrants themselves or by Zionist organizations, for which it was a good possibility to actually get some of their assets out of Czechoslovakia by legal means. So in combination, this would give £1,000 to each of the refugees, who would then fulfill the criteria for issuing the A1 capitalist certificate, so-called, and they would be able to migrate to Palestine. Majority of the Jewish property would remain in Czechoslovakia, and we know what happens to most of it, but at least portion of it would be rescued. So it was not only about people, it was also about assets. It was not a one-man project. We have to make that clear. Leo Herrmann, let's say, he was the brain, he came with the idea, he was like the CEO, let's say. But then there are many other important personalities. On the Czech side, it was these 2 ministers, Petr Zenkel and Josef Kalfus, who, despite the fact that post-Munich Czechoslovakia was turning anti-Semitic relatively quickly, during just a couple of months, these 2 ministers were sympathetic to the Jewish cause. On the side of the Jewish agency, Yitzhak Greenbaum and Eliezer Kaplan were involved. This man is very important, Fritz Yitzhak Ullmann. He was basically, if Leo Herrmann was the CEO, Yitzhak Ullmann would be like the HR manager, let's say. He was responsible for all the personal details of the immigrants. And then there is this person who would deserve a special lecture of his own. And very likely he would also deserve the Israeli honor of righteous among nations, because he was not Jewish. He was a British banker, and he was a member of the Ranciman mission to Czechoslovakia in 1938, before Munich. Maybe you have heard about the so-called Ranciman mission. It was quite an infamous diplomatic mission, which basically pushed Czechoslovakia into conceding more and more to the Nazis. But with one exception. Robert Stopford was the only member of that mission who was sympathetic to Czechoslovakia. And after that mission ended, he stayed behind as a special liaison officer for refugees. And he helped the Jewish organizations to navigate the precarious maze, the labyrinths of the British bureaucracy. And very often, when there were any problems with the British bureaucracy, Robert Stopford was there, and he also had to negotiate, on the other hand, with the Nazis, and sometimes even risking his life. So, if there is any award for righteous among nations from this story, it could well be this person, whose story is also almost forgotten. The transfer deal was finalized on 13th of January 1939. And the first transport departed in late February 1939. We know that there were about 80 people on board of that train, and that is basically all we know about it. There are no other records. At the time, it was just one of the many refugee trains, and it just disappeared in the ocean of other refugees. However, the second train made history, and it is this train which brought many of you to this lecture, because on March 14th, 1939, from the Prague main station, there was a train full of important Zionist personalities, including people like Felix Weltsch and Szymon Adler and Max Brod, for example. And it was this train which brought Max Brod out of the country. And when Max Brod describes this fateful journey out of Czechoslovakia in the very last night, because if you remember the Czech history, 14th March 1939, what kind of date is that? It's the date in which the Nazi occupation of Bohemia and Moravia begins. Hacha is already in Berlin. Nazi forces are starting to take over the Czech territory. And this last train leaves the territory just 5 minutes before the borders are closed. And this train was able to leave only thanks to Czechoslovak transfer agreements negotiated by Leo Herrmann. And it was this train journey in which Max Brod took a nice little suitcase, and in that suitcase, the archive of Franz Kafka's writings. Without Max Brod, many of the Franz Kafka's writings would have been lost, and without Leo Herrmann, Max Brod would have been lost. And we know Max Brod writes that in his own memoirs, Život plný bojů, Life Full of Struggles, that just the night after they left, Gestapo came to the offices where he worked looking for him. Now, the Nazi occupation. This is how the agreement looked like. A typical, British bill with all the fancy stamps and stuff. And this is how Felix Weltsch, one of the passengers on that train, also described the moments they were crossing the border. Basically, they were lucky because the station was already manned by German soldiers, but fortunately, the border officials were still Czechs. So they let the train pass without any significant problems. But it was really in the last minute, just 5 minutes after that, the tracks were closed. And Max Brod traveled from Prague through Moravská Ostrava, that is in Moravian Silesia, to Poland, and then further to Romania, to a Black Sea port, and there from Black Sea on a ship to Tel Aviv. And on 22nd March of 1939, we see an interview with Max Brod in the labor newspaper Davar, in which he describes this fateful journey again. And we also see from the documentation that Dr. Max Brod, passport number 17725, transferred 225,000 crowns, which after deducting 7,312 pounds and 50 pence for travel expenses, made 967 pounds and 10 pence, which Max Brod successfully transferred to Palestine. This also brings us to one of the important and potentially controversial issues with this story. Most of the people who participated in this and who were rescued by this Czechoslovak transfer, they had to somehow get 800 pounds. And as I said, this was quite a significant amount of money. So either you had to have a significant financial capital or what we call a social capital. That means you had to be somehow important for the Zionist movement, trustworthy to the movement, so that they trusted you with that amount of money to transfer to Palestine. The Nazi occupation changed a lot of things, and the project got almost stopped because suddenly Czechoslovakia was gone. All the assets of the Czechoslovak National Bank were frozen. Czechoslovakia was still not in enemy territory because the war still didn't break out, but still it was a problem. The Brits were very concerned that the Nazis would try to steal the money and use it for their war effort, which was a very real concern. So this created new set of problems that Leo Herrmann had to frantically solve, going back and forth between London and Jerusalem, and with significant help of Robert Stopford. Additional, about 900 Jews have managed to legally emigrate from the Protectorate to Palestine by 21st of July 1939. But then even more problems came. Before we get to these problems, just another honorable mention of people without whom this entire story would also be impossible. In Prague, in order to organize and deal with all the complicated bureaucracy, a special committee was established, a 4-person committee, the so-called transfer committee, transferová kancelář, and it composed of these four personalities. Each of them would deserve their own lecture. Each of them is like who is who in the history of Czechoslovak Jewry, and all of them have not survived the war. All of them were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Some people who participated in organization of this of the transfer agreement have managed to escape. For example, David Paul Meretz, another very important personality. If Leo Herrmann was the CEO and Fritz Ullmann was the HR manager, David Paul Meretz was the accounting manager. He was the financial brain. He was the one who made sure that all the budgets, all the accounting fits into the last penny. He was a financial expert, very skilled lawyer, and he managed to escape in autumn 1939 in one of the last transports after direct intervention of Leo Herrmann, who had to promise to the Germans that David Paul Meretz will never return. David Paul Meretz escaped to Palestine. He later saw establishment of the state of Israel and became an important official at the Israeli Ministry of Finance. And here we see him in 1961 testifying against Adolf Eichmann, because from his position he had to deal with Adolf Eichmann quite a lot in Prague. So here we see him testifying in the court, and Rabbi has already mentioned Marie Šmolková, very important personality who led the social care department. She was the one who convinced Nicholas Winton to even start caring about the plight of Jews of Czechoslovakia, and she also participated, was helping the Jewish refugees who were preparing to leave in the Czechoslovak transfer, and she managed to escape from the protectorate. Later she moved to London, but unfortunately she died there shortly thereafter, isolated and depressed. And Fritz Ullmann, the HR manager, as I said, he managed to escape to Palestine as well as part of this transfer agreement in one of the last transports. Since it was no longer possible, or since Czechoslovakia stopped existing, there was a problem how to actually spend the remaining portion of the money that were dedicated to the project. Czechoslovakia was no longer existing. Protectorate was under Nazi control. So how to do it to make sure that the Nazis will not get their hands on the money? Here comes Robert Stopford, who came with this idea to establish the so-called Czechoslovak Refugee Trust. The Czechoslovak Refugee Trust was an independent entity which represented the Czechoslovak government in exile and basically took responsibility of spending the money from the post-Munich loan and gift. Most of that money was used by the Czechoslovak Refugee Trust to basically cover all the expenses of the Czechoslovak government in exile. That means training of the fighter pilots in Britain and participation of Czechoslovaks in Tobruk and rent of Jan Masaryk when he was living in London and everything, all these things, social care for the refugees, etc., etc. And a small portion was also still the remaining part of the transfer agreement's money. So basically, the money would never enter the protectorate. It was all the transfers, all the transactions were basically taking place in Britain between British National Bank and this Czechoslovak Refugee Trust, who then, after the refugees came to Palestine, transferred the money to Palestine. So basically, the money was still on the British territory, on the British-controlled territory. Here are the checks that confirmed the financial transactions. The first one is from August 1939. The other one was from April 1940, because it took a long time to finalize everything. Of course, the Nazis were not happy that the money would not go into their hands. So they established something in which they were experts. They established a bureaucratic institution, which was basically a very well-oiled bureaucratic machine designed to strip all the immigrants from their assets. And long story short, it was a complicated machinery designed to collect £1,000 from these refugees, even before they could get their £1,000 from the British and the Zionist organizations. So basically, it made the immigration twice as expensive through a very devious system of various fees and taxes and fines and etc., etc. It basically attached itself to the entire scheme and sucked the immigrants dry. It was a very degrading process, as the immigrants describe it, and it was designed to not only strip the people of their money, but also to humiliate them. And we can see protocols from interrogations of the immigrants who came to Palestine and who then had to explain why they are unable to bring the entire sum that was negotiated. Because, for example, here this man says, I was prescribed by the Zentralstelle für jüdische Auswanderung in Prague additional so-called Jewish tax of 125,000 crowns on top of a release fee of 100,000 crowns. So basically, the Nazis took twice the money that the immigrants actually needed. There were even more problems. For example, the British bureaucracy. There was one moment in which the immigration certificates arrived to the British embassy, ready to be distributed among the immigrants, only to be found that they are valid only for adults, not for children. And as David Paul Meretz wrote bitterly, were we supposed to throw the children into Moldau? And this quote somehow made it to the press, and it was a huge scandal. And the British had to send new certificates, but just to show you all the problems they had to deal with. Another problem was that in September 1939 the war broke out, and suddenly Czechoslovakia became enemy territory. The sanctions regime was imposed, and basically any international money transfers became impossible, and it was also impossible to allow any people from that enemy territory into the territory of the British Empire. Leo Herrmann managed to negotiate an exception for those people who managed to acquire their certificates before the war broke out. So that was good. But how to get these people out of the Nazi territory? Because first the Nazis wanted to make sure that these people do not return. The British were concerned that the Nazis might steal the money, etc. And even things like buying a ship ticket was almost impossible because it required an international financial transfer between Britain and Germany, which was almost impossible at the time. But everything was finally overcome. Leo Herrmann's letters and diary entries from that era are like roller coaster of emotions, enthusiasm and deep depression and optimism and deep skepticism. But in majority of the people who were rescued under this transfer agreement actually made it out after the war broke out. And most when you find references to the Czechoslovak agreement, or it is usually in reference to Max Brod, etc., etc. That's the famous story. But people don't realize that the majority of those people who were rescued actually made it after the war broke out. Ships were hired, for example, here Galilea, the ship that later became infamous in the 1942 sinking, but here it served its role very well. It was one of the many ships that were rented for the people. And here, thanks to one of thanks to a grandson of one of the people who were rescued, who allowed me to look into his personal archive. I have managed to even reconstruct a journey of one of the particular people. So here we see the laissez-passer, the release basically, which serves as a replacement for passport. It's like a one-way passport out of the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. And here we see the certificate of naturalization in Palestine. They have even documented their journey. One of them had a camera. So they seem to have actually enjoyed the journey. They took it as if they were on some sort of a vacation, you know, enjoying the views, taking photographs, etc. The last refugees, as was also informed by the Jewish Telegraphic Agency here in the US, arrived to Palestine in January 1940. The entire accounting and all the like budgetary and financial details took several more months to finalize, but it was successful. And in April 1940, Leo Herrmann receives letters confirming the financial transfer and commending him for these great achievements. So the issue is how many people were actually rescued. The problem is that literature gives some numbers without really providing any like documentary evidence, and some of the documentary evidence from archives can be misleading because it might be coming from different points in time in which the organizers themselves were even trying to get to the bottom of how many people they have actually rescued. The Czechoslovak transfer had some very strict regulations. So it was, for example, found that some people were later found to be ineligible. So they had to be crossed out. They have arrived to Palestine, but the financial side of things couldn't be put under the umbrella of the Czechoslovak transfer and was not eligible for the funding, etc., etc. So many different numbers were circulating at the time. I have come to this conclusion, to this table, compiled from multiple sources, in which the final number is 2,506. And I have managed to get even monthly statistics, and after the war broke out, even by the individual ships. And here on a timeline, we can see it by months. This was the first transport in February. This was the one in which Max Brod was in. It continued in April, then it stops because of the Zentralstelle and things like that. But it started to grow again. But then the war breaks out, and again there is a decline. Then it was all resolved, and finally, in the late 1939, these two largest transports were able to depart. And in the last one, there were also people like David Paul Meretz and Fritz Ullmann. Here, courtesy of personal archive of David Zielensieger. Here are some pictures of Leo Herrmann with his family from that time. He was moving back and forth between Jerusalem and London. So here we see him with his daughter, for example, Ruth, who again would deserve a special lecture of her own, because she was also an extremely interesting personality. After the war, Leo Herrmann visited Czechoslovakia for the last time in September 1945. And it was not exactly a positive visit. What he saw in Czechoslovakia after the war left him bittered and saddened. First of all, his visit coincided with the infamous pogrom in Topolčany, which put a very negative shadow onto it. Second, he could not help but notice the post-genocide state of the Czechoslovak society. Prague completely devoid of its native Jewish population. There were some Jews in Prague, but these were mostly, as he saw it, he saw mostly refugees like Ostjuden from Rusinia, from Poland, simply Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe. The German Jewish Prague that he remembered simply disappeared. He visited his birthplace of Landskron, only to find that the Jewish cemetery, that the Jewish portion of the city cemetery was completely destroyed during the war, including the grave of his mother, which was stolen and never found. He saw that this formerly German-speaking town, suddenly German was only spoken in silence, in whispers. He saw the Sudeten Germans with white bands being labeled for expulsion, etc., etc. He returned to Israel and wrote a travelogue of that visit. It is a very interesting testimony about the atmosphere in Czechoslovakia after the war, but unfortunately it is not a pleasant reading. Leo Herrmann saw the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, but he died shortly thereafter. In 1951. He returned to his favorite hobby, the film industry. He was a production manager of a Hebrew film, Miklala Lebracha, Out of Evil, in 1950, but he died at the 10th of September 1951. The local offices of Keren Ha-Yesod were allegedly flooded with condolences, and I have seen many of them in the archives. Here is some propaganda of Keren Ha-Yesod in Czech that was published after the war. Leo Herrmann, as I said, he met many of the famous personalities. I have already mentioned Martin Buber. Here we see him with Marc Chagall. Here we see him with the later Israeli president Chaim Weizmann. And this is obituary of Leo Herrmann published by the labor newspaper Davar, which at the time mentioned his contribution to the Czechoslovak transfer. In 1954, a memorial book in his name was published by his as an initiative of his sister, and it was edited by Felix Weltsch. But then, nothing. His memory seems to have disappeared, and I have some theories why. In Israel, it could have been the fact that 1950s were not exactly, let's say, positively minded towards these activities such as the transfer agreement. It took the Israeli society more than a decade to actually understand what was it like to survive the Holocaust and what dilemmas these people had to deal with. And many of these many of these things like the avara, like the transfer agreement, like Israel Kastner, for example, many of these things were seen as cases of collaboration, not as cases of heroism. And in the Czech society, the problem was that not only that Herrmann was a Jew, he was a German-speaking Jew. And that was something which, again, was not exactly convenient in the post-war Czechoslovakia. The negative tendencies towards everything German unfortunately also swept away a lot of the memory of the Czechoslovak Jews. And as Shmuel Hugo Bergman wrote in that memorial book, Leo Herrmann, he was a soul that was meant for a much bigger purpose. But the history did not allow it to really explore its full potential. Shmuel Hugo Bergman even spoke in a bit of a disappointment that Leo Herrmann was just too humble. He was just like a secretary, nothing more. But I dare to disagree with Shmuel Hugo Bergman on this one. I would like to remind the famous essay of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, who the essay was about work, and who spoke about the importance of this little man's work, which is the actual backbone of the nation. I would also like to dedicate this lecture to one important man, and that is grandson of Leo Herrmann, who unfortunately passed away in May of this year, and who cannot be here with us. And I was so much hoping to meet him in person. He found me by Google himself. And in just a couple of weeks, after a couple of Zoom calls and emails, we became close friends. And he shared a lot of things from his personal archive. And he was himself a very bright journalist. He was a tech journalist for Bloomberg. Very, very bright person until his very last moments. And if you could please spare a prayer if you are religious, then please do so for this wonderful man. The more I am happy that we have another grandson of Leo Herrmann here in the audience, Michael Zielensieger. I will finish by repeating my pledge. Please, if you have anything in your personal archive, any story that you might share, any document, any tidbits that might be important for this story, please do not hesitate to share it. There is still many empty spaces in that story. There are still many places in which I'm walking on a thin ice, and I need more documentation, more evidence. So please, if you have anything, you are very welcome. Thank you very much.
Friends, closing thoughts and closing announcements, please. In our time, we see how history can be distorted, how easily the innocent and the defenders can be forgotten, how the guilty are sometimes reprieved and forgiven in popular media, and rehabilitated, even championed by malevolent, ideologically driven elements in society intent on dismantling the democracy in which they live. Therein lies the importance of Professor Tarant's work, a granular examination of history so that there can be no doubt about what the truth has to be. His work is to help us remember even when we feel comfortable. Even when we feel comfortable and we are eager to forget. It's the raison d'etre of the Society for the History of Czechoslovak Jews and of the Jewish Museum in Prague, the joint sponsors of this program.